Hi folks, and welcome to Breaking Woke, how to identify, debunk and dismantle dangerous ideas. I'm Douglas Kruger, author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. Well folks, I've written an entire book on the evil/stupidity of the radical left, but from time to time, they can still surprise me. Here's a story out of Australia. And now we have to just mention here that this is out of the state of Victoria, not the whole of Australia. They have their own legislation here. And Australia is, by and large, still a very Christian, very conservative nation and still has its head screwed on right in many appreciable ways. Victoria, however, to put this in some sort of an international context, if you were from America, say from Texas, Victoria is to Australia what Austin is to Texas. So here's what's happened over the course of the past couple of days. They have passed a law whereby you, if you try to pray for or counsel someone who is struggling with gender identity issues, you will face a fine or imprisonment for doing so. This is a report from, and it's all over the media, but I've picked on caldronpool.com, which is one of the sites that I follow. Victoria's apostasy laws. It's now illegal to help LGBTQ people who want to change. So listen to this. The Victorian government has successfully passed its so-called Change or Suppression Conversion Practices Prohibition Bill. Individuals found to have engaged in forbidden practices, such as counselling and offering prayer, could face up to 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine. Here are some of the points. 10 points are: number one, someone can be prosecuted even if the person involved had consented to change their sexual identity or behavior. Number two, a forbidden practice includes, but is not limited to, counseling or even offering prayer. Number three, the person making the allegation can remain completely anonymous. Isn't that great? So you can destroy people's lives and careers by making an anonymous complaint, thus preventing the accused any right to know who is making the complaint. That's leftist justice for you, all over. Number four, there is a complete redefinition of what now qualifies as domestic violence. If, for example, you want to counsel your child who is a boy and thinks he is a girl, that qualifies as domestic violence. Isn't that interesting? Number five, harassment is now even distributing literature which promotes that a person can change, i.e. that they can, when we say change, what that actually means is remain who they were actually born in terms of their gender. Number six, if a person is found guilty, the Commission can send a person off for re-education. Re-education, is that not the most chilling thing you've ever heard? So put this in context again. You're raising a child. Your child decides that he is actually a she. You try to counsel or pray for your child. The state can re-educate you. Tell me that's not the most chilling thing you have ever heard. Number seven, following on from this, persons who have been found guilty will be under measures to enforce that they comply with the act. Number eight, those found guilty will be put on a public register to be named and shamed. Oh, the Marxist left do love their registers of dissidents to name and shame. Number nine, traditional Christian doctrine is now the subject of criminal prosecution. Well done, Victoria. Well done. What a step forward for you. Number 10, following on from this, what would have only a short while ago been considered a virtue, a report from the Human Rights Law Centre has denounced any such conversion practice, which includes encouraging someone to remain sexually celibate. So even encouraging someone to remain celibate is now a problem, and it's a legal problem, enforceable by law. The article goes on to say if that's not bad enough, the bill effectively recognises no borders. So anyone found guilty of engaging with a Victorian in the rest of Australia is subject to this criminal action. The bill was passed despite drawing vocal opposition from hundreds of Victoria's senior religious leaders and more than 30 religious organisations. So there's democracy for you. People are saying this goes against our fundamental belief systems. You can't do it. The government did it anyway. Set up registries, re-education camps, make sure that you break up families, all these good things you cannot teach Christian principles by law in this particular scenario. So the Australian Christian Lobby, now this is a group that I follow from outside of their nation, and I try to support them as much as I can. They called this legislation the most dangerous and draconian bill the nation has ever seen, warning that it would criminalise many common religious practices, which includes regulating the subject matter of prayers, according to Section 5.3, making some consensual prayers into criminal acts if they pertain to a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, criminalising voluntary faith-based support groups for people who want to live out their sexual orientation or gender identity consistent with their faith, making certain conversations about faith-based sexual ethics illegal, as explained in the explanatory memorandum, making all faith-based teaching or discussion on issues of sexual orientation or gender identity legally fraught, and here's the one that gets to me, forcing parents to affirm and encourage a child's felt gender identity at any given time, regardless of circumstances, and to permit gender transition medical therapies. Or in other words, as they say, if you have unwanted sexual desires or gender identity issues, it will now be illegal for anyone to attempt to help you. Now, folks, this is a topic that I spend some time on in Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good, because it's a battlefront right now, and it is one that goes for our children. We can spend a lot of time on this, but I'd like to give you the short version. There are 4 things that you need to know about this topic. The first one, the idea that genders are in any way whatsoever interchangeable, that they are free-floating edifices, that they are not biologically or neurologically or grounded in evolution, is totally fraudulent. It comes from a scientist named John Money. One man did the so-called science on this one, and he decided that he had proved his thesis, which was that gender was a free-floating construct. What happened was he got hold of 2 boys. One of the small boys had a botched circumcision. They raised the small boy as a girl. He made the boy interact with his brother in sexual ways. Both boys killed themselves. Both children killed themselves. John Money concluded and told the scientific and academic community, gender is a free-floating construct. It is interchangeable. It's a social construct. We are absolutely affirmed in our theory. Both boys killed themselves. That's the science on which it is based. Then what happened is feminists and gender theorists got hold of that result and baked it into every new generation of so-called science. If you ask a person with a PhD, is this science? If they come from the sociology department, they are radical Marxists or radical feminists, they will tell you yes. If you talk to an evolutionary biology, a biologist or a doctor, they will tell you no, because it isn't. It's rubbish. This is fraudulent and it is evil. It has not been proven. It is flat out wrong. Number 2, parents have to affirm and permit these therapies. Now, these therapies cause cancer. To flood a boy's body with female hormones or vice versa causes cancer, and this information gets constantly suppressed. Now, coming out of the UK, Douglas Murray has been reporting on institutes who have gotten into trouble for this one, who have gotten into legal trouble for this one, and who have not been pointing out that this flooding of a boy body with female hormones causes cancer in children. How can it be natural if something comes from the opposite gender and causes cancer? And yet, Victoria's response? Brilliant idea. Let's do this to our children. Let's make sure that parents can't even oppose doing this to their own children. Victoria, you will answer for this one to God. Number 3, most important of all, the research has indicated that most kids grow out of this. Most. So if you have, let's say for example, 100 confused young children, and they think that they might be a member of the opposite gender, of that group, if you leave them alone, almost all of them will outgrow this idea and end up living quite normally and naturally according to their born gender. Most of them outgrow it. But now you create a situation in which the entire community, including the parents, are legally compelled not just to entertain this, but to support it and to go for the genital mutilation and the flooding of hormones in this child's body. You compel it by law. This, by definition, is child abuse. Most of those kids would have outgrown that and would not go that route, but you're forcing the issue, you're doing it legally, and you're doing it against the will of the parents. How dare you? And number 4, up until a very few years ago, gender dysphoria was classified globally as a mental disorder. Do you know why it isn't classified that way anymore? Do you know what changed? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Political advocacy changed. Political correctness got that struck out of the journals. Nothing whatsoever changed except the feelings of weirdos on the left. Folks, there have been several responses to this one, very obviously, because you're messing with people's children here, and you're hurting people's children here. And I think one of the best answers to this came out of a Christian group that says, our response to this is to live as though the law doesn't exist, because we are answerable to God and to our children, not to the government. And when the government does something that harms our relationship with God, our relationship with our children, we obey God and we serve our children. And if that means going to jail, then so be it. I almost think that what has to happen here is that enough people have to do this and get taken to court. You have to have hundreds of people go to jail for this one and say, we are unapologetic because this is wrong. What I believe would then happen is that sensible Australians, who tend to have their heads screwed on pretty correctly, these are very sensible, down-to-earth people in my experience, would eventually have to rebel against this and say, this is ludicrous. You have church groups, you have counsellors, you have parents going to jail for a law that we don't believe in and that the science doesn't support. Folks, share this idea, share the science behind it. This John Money story, we need to know that story, we need to tell that story. Anytime someone ever talks about children and gender dysphoria and maybe a boy is a girl, we need to tell them the fraudulent science behind it. Both boys died in the experiment, both destroyed themselves, and the fraudulent scientist said, my science is a success. It's settled. Gender is a social construct. He lied, and children are paying the price for that. Folks, for our small part, what we need to do is speak out against this as often as we can. We need to educate people as often as we can. And if you are in Victoria and you are coming up against this, my suggestion to you is that you owe allegiance to God and your children, not to your government. This one has to be overturned. You have to challenge it legally. You have to challenge it socially. It has got to go. How much worse could this get if that becomes precedent setting for your nation? It cannot stand.